Well, evolution is one of the most fascinating principles that govern our world. It is the factor of change that made all life on Earth what it is today. At its core is the principle of natural selection that enables the creation of immense complexity by using a couple of simple rules. Now we can use these rules for various types of optimizations in many different fields. And I will try to explain the basic principles of evolution and show you how we can use them in structural and architectural design. Around 3.8 billion years ago, first forms of self-replicating molecules appeared, and this led to the creation of RNA and DNA. Now, DNA is a code, an algorithm basically, a set of instructions that guides the process of creation of, well, you. We will stick to the example of humans because it might be the easiest way to understand. You have trillions of cells in your body, and they are all originated from a single cell, from the fertilized egg. How? Through the morphogenetic processes guided by DNA. Well, that is a difficult subject that has to be left for another time. But every cell in your body contains a copy of your DNA. Richard Dawkins compares our body to an enormous building, and each cell to a room in that building. And each room contains books with blueprints for the entire building. These blueprints come in 46 volumes in humans, which is the number of chromosomes in a cell. These blueprints, the DNA, consists out of simple units called nucleotides. So those are the basic building blocks of life on the planet, and you could say those are the zeros and ones of the algorithm that guides the creation of you and me. I know what you're thinking. Are we living in a matrix? And the answer is yes. But I will address that in some other video. Now imagine an inanimate object like a steel roof structure. I'm choosing a grid structure because I explored them extensively, but the whole point is that the principles can be applied to any building or structure that we strive to create. Let us try to simplify this structure and extract the principle of its creation. The structure is on a surface, and a surface is describable by parametric equations in such a way that every point on the surface has two coordinates, u and v. Our structure consists of cells, and those cells have center points. So if you give me a surface, I can make a string of point coordinates, and this string is everything I need to describe my structure. This is only one way of turning a 3D structure into one-dimensional string of numbers. There are infinite number of ways to do it, but it is on us to choose the simplest one and the one that makes sense. Now that we know that every structure can be represented with some form of DNA, let us go back to biology and see what happens when an egg is fertilized by the spermatozoa. We have 46 volumes of instructions coming from our mother and 46 volumes of instructions coming from our father. It is important to remember that these volumes are paired. There are always 23 pairs of chromosomes. You were created by choosing one volume from your mother and one volume from your father, from every pair. In this way, nature introduces variety and inheritance at the same time. This opens up an extremely interesting story about dominant and recessive genes, but we'll have to leave that for another time. Now let us go back to our roof. Imagine now if we have two different roof structures and if we try to breed them. We could combine their DNA using this crossover and exchange different elements so that we create a structural offspring that differs from its parents, but at the same time contains the characteristics of both of them. Since this does not necessarily introduce enough variety, nature came up with a solution for it: a random mutation. Every now and then nature introduces a random change into our DNA. This stirs up the gene pool and provides a possibility for some new unexplored options. It is basically an error in the process of copying the instructions that can sometimes bring irrelevant changes and sometimes fundamental changes. Those fundamental changes can be extremely bad, but sometimes extremely beneficial for the individual. And the ones that are beneficial will make our individual healthier and more fit, and will ensure that this mutation persists and multiplies in the future generations. Now that we started talking about being fit and generations, we come to the second part of our explanation. So far we have talked about an individual and how an individual human or a flower or a steel roof structure can come to being, with their DNA being the basic unit of natural selection. But what is natural selection? It is a very simple process that rests on the fact that some living things produce more offspring than others. If you have a certain number of individual organisms and you put them in a specific environment, some of them will prove to be fitter than the others. They will prove to be stronger, healthier, adaptable to the environmental conditions, and this will enable them to produce more offspring. By having more children, their genetic information gets passed on. So the ones that die out take their DNA with them.
At this point, Rudy II Jasperson left the party. But then, as anyone can plainly see, he wasn't a monkey, right?
And that is how from one generation to the next, the genes that create organisms more capable of surviving get multiplied. Now I know what you're thinking. Is the movie Idiocracy a true depiction of the future? And the answer is yes, but we'll have to leave that for some other time. Surprisingly, this process is maybe easier to explain if we go back to our grid structure. In nature, there are complex environments and basically only one goal: survival and reproduction. In our artificial evolution, we can decide on the goal and on the environment. We can say, for example, that our goal is to produce structures that show the greatest stability, or structures that show the least amount of deformation, or the least amount of stress in its members. Or we can try to achieve all those goals at once, something known as multi-objective optimization. Once we decide on the goal, we can think about our environment. We usually start by applying some loads, self-weight, wind, snow, and we have the freedom to introduce many limitations that will help reach our goal more quickly. We can limit our structure to one material. We can tell the code that we do not want members longer than 4 meters or shorter than 1 meter, or that we do not want cells larger than 5 square meters. So when we set our goals and limitations, we are basically creating something that is called a fitness function. The DNA of every generated individual will go inside this function and produce a single value that will show how fit that solution is. You should remember that the general fitness does not exist. The organism, in our case, is only fit according to our criteria. Once we change our goal and our limitations, the solution will have another fitness value. Once we have our function, we can evaluate our randomly generated solutions and start the process of evolution.
Why cold germs can fly farther than Miss May can blow the feather.
In this process, the organisms with higher fitness will be chosen to create new offspring. They will breed and create children, a new generation. Bad genes will die out, good genes will propagate. And after a certain number of iterations, you will get a convergence. A generation of solutions that show the best possible fitness for the goal and limitations you set. For such complex problems with huge number of solutions, our human intuition doesn't really help, and the only way to find out answers is to ask the computer to try out millions of possibilities for you and tell you what the best option is for the criteria you define. We live in the era of weak artificial intelligence, and we have to get used to the fact that computers are not tools anymore. They are our advisors, and we should use that fact in the best possible way. Now I know what you're thinking. This video was pretty interesting, but are you going to end it in such a boring way? And the answer is no. What?